Lies of P is one of my favorite Souls-like games ever released. I love its gothic tone and revised story of Pinocchio, and how it wove its own unique narrative from it. Also because the Bloodborne vibes are off the charts. So if you are a fan of Bloodborne like I am, you are always going to give it a chance. But I ended up loving it way more than I imagined I would. I even 100%ed the game on Steam and made my own video on it. Now, fast forward to the Summer Games Fest 2025, where they announced that the previously announced DLC, Lies of P Overture, was being shadow dropped that day. Needless to say, my excitement couldn't be higher, but that also meant that I was not prepared for this at all. So apologies if this is a little bit late, but I wanted to get my thoughts on Overture out there before I move on to Stellar Blade's PC release content. So, Overture's DLC was not what I expected, being as I avoided as much marketing as possible, and it doesn't deal with some of the cliffhangers left at the end of the game. Instead, this is a prequel DLC that enhances and fleshes out the events of the main game in new and interesting ways, taking you to crazy new places like a mutated zoo, all while subverting your expectations as discovering and exploring these events that you only heard about in the base game leads to revelations that nothing was really as it seemed when it came to Krot's past tragedies. Also on this adventure is the legendary stalker Leia, who you will learn a lot about as she ties in very closely to the main narrative around the title character. And I gotta say, these parts were some of my favorite, as her story brings a lot of emotional weight to a lot of your adventure and revelations that you discover. And it all leads to a finale that I thought was even more peak than the base game, with a boss fight I really had to buckle down for in order to get past, or very far at all. I had to completely change my tactics and come at it in a completely different way than I had been fighting my way through previously. And speaking of fighting previously, you can now challenge any boss to a rematch at any time, which is a great feature that I wish more Souls-like titles would adopt. And this leads me to the meat and potatoes of the DLC. New weapons, amulets, and enemies to test them out on. And while I won't go into depth and detail on everything because some of these weapons should remain a surprise, I will, however, let you know that all of the new weapons and everything are fantastic and do change your playstyle in meaningful ways. The new weapons are a blast to use, and even if I personally didn't stick with any of the new weapons during my playthrough, I have my favorites and I'm a creature of habit. I loved experimenting with them and using them for at least a while after discovery, and some of these were truly unique and surprising in more than a few ways, with one in particular reminding me a lot of Leon's gunblade from Final Fantasy VIII. And the game also brought us a bow and arrow, which was an absolute joy to use. Not the most powerful thing, but very fun. And it's not just for combat either, as it has some practical applications as well, which was a huge surprise as there aren't many places in the base game where you interacted with your environment in such a fun way. I really hope that in the sequel this really sticks around, as it has me paying way more attention to my environment than ever before. I also love the fact that some weapons that you've accumulated during the base game made special appearances throughout the DLC, such as a giant puppet axe that Motivity builds tend to really love, being wielded by an insane puppet later in the DLC. There is one point of contention with this DLC though, and that is the inclusion of difficulty options. I love when difficulty options are included in most games, as they tend to expand the potential audience for the games themselves, since not everyone loves to get good in a way. I tend to enjoy a more difficult experience myself, as it presses you to utilize every part of the game in order to come out victorious. But that sometimes gets in the way of recommending them to some people, especially some that I know, as I know they may not have the time, energy, or even skill, no offense, to get through in an enjoyable manner. But here I scratch my head if its inclusion here in Overture as a quality of life feature for the entire game is a good or bad thing. I land somewhere in the middle, as the developers before have explicitly stated that they weren't interested in difficulty toggles for their game just last year. I'm not against it, but it's an interesting pivot that I did not expect. Now, being as that I wasn't ready for this DLC and only had one save file ready to play on, New Game Plus 3, and while starting out this was a big challenge to get through the game on, It basically put me in a very unique position to really test out the difficulty options, as they can be changed anytime in game. There are now 3 different difficulty options that basically equivalent to easy, normal, and hard, with hard or legendary stalker being the default setting. I tested each while running around the prison area of the DLC, and I couldn't notice any tangible difference between difficulties beyond you taking less damage and you doing more damage to enemies. Parrying and dodging felt pretty much the same, as did the aggressiveness of bosses, as I declared rematches on the same prison boss on each difficulty. That being said, it will make it much easier for people to get through them, and certain other skill checks that would hold people back from enjoying the entirety of the story. Overall, I think Overture is a fantastic DLC for Lies of P, with plenty to bring to the table, including great changes to the base game. It brings more lore, surprises, weapons, and memorable characters, and did exactly what I wanted it to. Bring me more of the same great game with some new and enjoyable additions. And with it taking me around 8 to 10 hours to complete, with some replayability in there, I feel I definitely got my money's worth. I can definitely recommend this DLC and the full game before it to anyone with even a passing interest in action games, especially if you love a unique setting and a story to go along with it. Thank you so much for watching. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you want to see or hear more from me. I'm Habit Fanatic. Have a wonderful day. Peace.